As many of you know, I have advocated for crime victims for years. I do this work because the criminal justice system let me down when they failed to notify me of the release of my father's murderer. The system should support victims, not bring them additional harm. I am committed to ensuring that others do not endure the same treatment I did. The National Crime Victim Law Institute is part of the change. It provides legal expertise and training across the country so victims have access to the best advocacy possible. By supporting NCVLI, you are ensuring crime victims and survivors do not experience more indignities than they have already suffered. I am honored tonight to introduce a fellow actor and survivor who is joining us in this fight. Katie Wee's story is emblematic of a criminal justice system inflicting new harms on victims. It is my great privilege to introduce to you my friend Katie Wee, who is going to share her story with you.
Thank you so much to Kelsey Grammer for that beautiful introduction, and thank you all for being a part of Voices for Justice. Today I want to talk about something that I have figured out to be true in my own life, and that is this: when you serve yourself, you serve the world. And I want to tell you about how that concept has played out in my life so far. So, I was the type of little girl who could not be anything other than exactly who she was. I showed up to my first day of ballet class in a full-blown tutu, despite the fact that we were supposed to wear black leotards and pink tights. And I used to pass out tickets to my show to all my relatives after every family gathering, where they basically just had to watch me improvise, dance, and act around after dinner for as long as the show went on. I was definitely someone who was determined to be exactly who I was meant to be in this world. I kept dancing for as long as that was fun for me, and eventually when that passion dried up, I decided I wanted to become an actress. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of other more practical things that I could have done with my degree from UCLA, maybe some things my parents would have liked better, but I couldn't get my friend Scott Dinsmore's words out of my head. He had started a whole business around living your legend and finding what you're passionate about and making it your work. And I couldn't not do that. I just had to do that. I had to become an actress. So many people told me that it was one of the hardest businesses to get started in and that I would have a really hard time getting any sort of traction, but I didn't care. I really needed to do it. So I did. And as I became an actress, I met other people who were also acting, and one of my friends had taken this voice class that she said had really helped her acting. So naturally, wanting to get better at everything I do, I signed up for this class, and I found myself in a class where we were learning to explore our emotions and understand what was going on with ourselves, which was not something I was comfortable with. I had been someone who had repressed a lot of my emotions and tried to keep some parts of my life blacked out from myself. In the process of bringing up all these emotions, I started to have flashbacks to a time when I was 12 years old and I was being sexually abused by my ballet teacher at the time. I hadn't told anyone. I'd kept this secret locked up so deep inside of me and felt so ashamed and guilty for what had happened. I didn't know how to control the emotions that were starting to come out of me. I was used to being in control of my life, and all of a sudden I felt overcome by emotion all the time. So I thought of something that my voice coach, Matt Beisner, had told me. He said, just do the next right thing. He was talking about an acting, but this had become my mantra for my life. And as someone who was used to doing the 10 steps to get from A to B, just doing the next right thing and trusting that the next thing would become obvious to me if I did that was a big leap of faith, but I was willing to try it. So in this place of feeling overcome by really uncomfortable emotions, I took myself to therapy. And in therapy, I started to work through everything that had happened to me. And when I got to a stable place with everything, my therapist said that she had to report my abuser to the authorities because he was still working with children. I Googled him and saw tons of pictures of him with lots of little girls, and my heart sank. I realized that I had a karmic burden to take care of, that I knew this person to be an abuser and a dangerous person for children, and I needed to probably do something about it. She asked if I would be willing to help report, and I said I needed some time to think about it. And that same time period was when my niece was born. She was the first little person in a new generation of my family. And when I was holding her, I started to realize that I felt for the first time in my life like an adult. And when I looked into her cute little face, I realized that I couldn't really live with myself if I didn't do what I could to make sure that I made the world a safer place for her. I started to see her face and all the faces of the little girls and the pictures with my abuser on the internet, and I started to feel like I couldn't not take action. So here I was again, just doing the next right thing, and I helped my therapist report. We reported, and a few weeks later I was interviewed by the police. They told me that they believed me, but that they would need more evidence in order to arrest my abuser. They asked me if I would be willing to secure a confession by meeting with him in person, and I had to think about this. This was way out of the field of possibility in terms of what my life was looking like at that time. I was pursuing my career. I was trying to maintain my relationships. I was trying to live a normal life and not get totally derailed by the emotions I was processing, let alone a whole criminal case. This wasn't something I was interested in. I didn't want to press charges. I just wanted to tip them off about a known pedophile who could potentially still be harming children and then get on with my life. But that wasn't possible. They told me that if I wanted something to be done, we would need to arrest him, and then it would be more likely that more victims would come forward and we could see how everything unfolded, but that I just needed to help them with this next step if I was willing to do so. They gave me the option, and I thought about it for a while. I knew I had the chance, the opportunity to completely withdraw from this process. But again, I had to do the next right thing. And sometimes we go kicking and screaming with that next right thing. It's that deeper sense of intuition, that place from our soul, that thing we know we need to do, but it's not always the thing that our human self wants to do. I really wanted to just get a nice bottle of rosé and binge a show and forget about the whole thing, but every time I looked at my niece, I was reminded of what I needed to do, what I felt within myself I had to. So I met with my abuser, and the plan worked. A few weeks later, he was arrested. And a few weeks after that, another victim came forward. When they asked her why she came forward, she said, "I didn't want people to think that she was lying." That meant the world to me. I had just kept following my next right thing, and here I was. I had enabled someone else to do their next right thing. As the trial got closer, I got more and more nervous. It took a couple of years from the first time I spoke to the police to get to this trial. And the night before the trial began, a third victim flew in from another country where she was living to testify in the case as well. I was on the stand for an entire day. My cross-examination involved questions from the defense attorney about if I was in love with my abuser. I reminded him that I was 12 years old at the time he was referring to. My abuse spanned a 4-year period, and I thought that the jury would know that a child can never possibly be having consensual sexual relations with an adult, and that didn't need to be explained. But apparently, I was wrong. Half of the jury members were not willing to convict my abuser, and a mistrial was declared. Reasons were cited by the jurors like there weren't enough victims, or that how could an adult possibly be attracted to a child? A juror told me to my face that if I'd really been being abused, I would have gotten myself out of that situation rather than continuing to go back for 4 years. I became aware at that point that she and some of the other jurors had a gigantic lack of education around the way sexual trauma is processed by the victim, especially a child victim. I lost kind of my faith in humanity at that point, and my faith in the idea that just doing the next right thing will yield the right results. Because I wasn't the only one let down here. Myself, the defense attorney, not the defense attorney, he was happy. Myself, the DA, the detective helping with my case, and the other 2 victims who had all conspired to try to do something good here, to try to take a dangerous person out of society. We'd all gone up against Goliath and we'd lost. It felt terrible and demoralizing, and I didn't understand why I'd done this. I was worse off. I'd spent 3 years of my life in this process and had not been able to save future generations from the injustice that I'd experienced. Tried to move on with my life. That was difficult. And almost a year later, another victim came forward. I got a call from the DA, and she told me that our abuser was now accepting the plea deal and would be serving a 20-year sentence in prison. This was all coming after he took the stand in the trial and said that none of the allegations had any merit and that I had in fact tried to seduce him. He was simply willing to lie on the stand to try to save his own skin, and then later, when the odds were too far stacked against him, he conceded and waved the white flag. It showed me yet again how manipulative people will take any opportunity to do what they can to further their own agenda, and how abusers like this absolutely need to be taken away from children and out of the places where they can harm other people. When we got this conviction, I felt a sense of relief. And I also felt overwhelmed by the feeling that by myself, I couldn't do this. I couldn't do something gigantic. But together, by me doing the next right thing, I enabled all these other people to join the fight and do their next right thing. And together, we were able to do something tremendous. I think sometimes we think that if you're going to do something good for the world, you're probably one of those do-gooders who has a bunch of bumper stickers on your car and you're really selfless. But for me, I found that this was not how I got here. I just kept following what I needed to do. I was a little girl that needed to be a performer. I then needed to become an actress. I then needed to get better at my craft, which led me to explore my feelings, which led me to therapy, which led me to reporting, which eventually led to this arrest and more victims coming forward, and eventually led to this conviction and my abuser being taken away from a person that he was abusing up until the night before he was arrested. I had no idea that my actions could help another girl out there, and probably way more that are going to be saved from the fact that he's not able to continue abusing. I was just following my own necessary desires, the things I had to do, my next right step. So, if you're wondering how this applies to you, think about what you would do if you were just doing your next right thing. What would you do if you were really listening to that voice inside of you that told you what to do? And it might not be logical, and you might not think it will help anyone else. It might feel like it's just serving yourself, and that's okay. Because by serving yourself, by doing what's right for you, you enable other people to do what's right for them. And you enable your energy to coalesce with other people moving in the same direction to create change that can actually impact lives. And if you're listening to this right now, you're aware of NCVLI and the important work that they do in leveling the playing field so that victims have an opportunity to actually get justice in the criminal justice system. We need this so badly. Presently, 1 in 6 women will be the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime, and less than 1% of rapes are ever convicted. This is a huge problem, and part of the problem is because going through the criminal justice system is soul-crushing. As someone who went through it, I can tell you, I was victim blamed, I was accused of coming forward for attention, my family was forced to testify. This tore up my mental health and tore up my relationships, and it's not the price we should have to pay for just trying to report a dangerous person to authorities. NCVLI is doing important work to make sure that victims are supported so that eventually the criminal justice system can be a vehicle for justice. Currently, we have a system that's broken and in need of repair. And no one person or one organization can fix it on their own. We need to all do our next right thing. And if donating to NCVLI is at all within the possibility of things you could do today, please know that this next right thing on your behalf enables NCVLI to go move forward and do so many more next right things for future victims of crime who will need their support. You might also say, it shouldn't be this hard to get justice. It shouldn't be this hard to put a dangerous person away so that they can't keep harming people, and I agree. And I feel like I had to walk my path with my astute, keen powers of observation so that I could report back to you where the potholes are and where the bumps are in the road so that we can make things better. because the next generation deserves a better world. And one super simple thing that we can all do to help make things better is start normalizing these conversations around sexual assault. I know it's not comfortable. I don't even think it's comfortable. I don't love talking about it, but at this point, it's one of those things. It's my next right thing. It's what I have to do. And the more we can't talk about these things, the more they're too uncomfortable or taboo or just would rather not talk about it, the more we make survivors feel like they have to deal with these things alone. And when they do, that sad, depressing feeling is really difficult in their life. But also, it makes it so that they don't report. And when we don't report, we have 2/3 of sexual assaults not being reported, and it's probably more. That's the current state. And with those low numbers of reporting, we're seeing low numbers of convictions. And with low numbers of convictions, that means abusers are out there running free and continuing to abuse. My abuser was abusing over a 20-year span, and that's just what we know of. When people get away with it, they keep going, and more people are harmed. And that's how we end up in the current state of affairs, where a child is sexually assaulted every 9 minutes in this country. If that makes you uncomfortable, start getting comfortable with talking about these things in your family, at work, with your friends, creating systems so that children and other people, adults, know where to go if they need to report, and start holding space for believing them. These things can go so far in the life of a survivor. If you have a survivor in your life, reach out to them, ask them how they're doing. The more we feel like these things can't be talked about, the more we feel like we should be ashamed of them. And as I understand now, while that's a super common feeling for survivors, for any survivors watching now, please know the shame was never yours to carry. And if you agree with me, start bringing these conversations out into the open so that we can create a better world where these things are reported more freely. We also need more pro bono work for victims of crime. If there's any lawyers watching and you're able to dedicate some of your time, please consider this. The DAs are incredible. I was so lucky to work with a wonderful DA, but they serve the state's best interest. We need people there serving victims' mental, physical, emotional, and legal well-being, looking out for them and making sure that their rights are protected so that they're not going up against horrible odds every time they choose to try to do what's right. Now, you might feel like, okay, back to the next right thing, back to the thing that makes me feel happy. I agree. While we have these big problems, nothing gets made better by thinking that we're just one person and we can't do anything about it. You are just one person, and that is your power. And only you get your specific internal guidance system that tells you where to go next and what to do next. And it might not make perfect sense, but you have to follow it. You have to do your next right thing. Because when you serve yourself, you serve the world. Thank you.